Hi, Anthony. How are you today?
Hey, Jenna, I'm good. I'm good. Thanks
It's
for
so nice
zooming
to
me.
see you. Where are you
Yeah,
zooming from?
I am zooming from my basement in the booming metropolis of Etobicoke, Ontario, the suburbs, if you will. But it is
I
still
think
part of
you're
Toronto.
one of the most passionate people when it comes to
Oh,
Etobicoke.
I love Etobicoke. It's a great place.
We met in jazz school, right? We
Yeah.
both went to U of T, and we've been playing together for a couple of years now. And
Hmm.
actually, fun fact for the audience, Anthony and I had our first friendship moment. Like there's always that first kind of moment where you go, oh, okay,
Yeah, yeah.
maybe friendship can begin now, is when we actually had a random conversation about music business in a stairwell.
In the stairwell. Yeah, that's right.
And we
That's right.
connected on our both of our passions for kind of the hustle and wanting
Our
to get
passions
gigs.
for potential. That's what it
Passions for
was.
potential, yes. And
Yes.
then I remember we left that conversation, and I know this because you told me, but we were both like, okay, I like this conversation, let's keep it
Yeah.
going.
Yeah.
And that
Yeah.
kind of became our first connection, is before we even played together for a actual moment in time there, like a couple
Yeah.
of months. We never even played together, we just discussed music business together.
Yeah. And it wasn't the nicest stairwell, but it was a stairwell.
So thank you so much for being here with me and with us all today. I'm really looking forward to kind of digging into some questions with you and picking your brain. And so I say we just go right in if you're up to it.
Sure. Yeah, of course.
Okay, so my
Let's
first
do that.
question is, as I said before, we met in jazz school,
Hmm.
specifically at the University of Toronto, and we've been playing together for a couple of years now.
Yeah.
I love to play with you, Anthony, not only because you can really swing, but also because you radiate positivity and joy when you play. And that's very obvious to me, and it's very infectious. And that's something that really sticks out to me when we play together.
Hmm.
It's always been very clear to me that you love jazz. Like,
Oh, yeah.
you love jazz music.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
can just talk and talk and talk about jazz music. You just love it. So
Yeah.
my curiosity and my question is, can you tell me a little bit about your journey towards becoming a jazz musician? What
Sure.
drew you to jazz? How did Anthony become a jazz pianist?
Right. Right. Well, thank you for the compliment first. That's very kind. Now, yeah, so with music, um, I'll back up just a bit. I started as most little children do. My parents put me into officially, I was about 4 years old, I think, and they put me into Italian lessons, and I hated it. I was so young. I have this one memory of having to color in fruit on like a worksheet and like name the names of the fruit in Italian, and I just couldn't stand it. So I like dropped out at the ripe age of 4 from Italian, and then my parents were like, okay, well, if he's not going to learn the Italian language, then let's put him in music because that's like a different form of language, right? So I started taking piano lessons, I think around 5. And of course, I don't remember much of the early days, but I guess I liked it because I kept going with it all the way up until I was doing Royal Conservatoire music exams and kind of getting to higher and higher levels. Um, and I got to a point where I was starting to get a bit tired of playing classical music and working on these really long, really big pieces for long periods of time. Um, it was just getting a bit boring and just a little bit constricting. And I remember right around that same time, I'm now talking maybe grade 10, middle of grade 10, and when I was in high school, my band teacher, who was a great influence and is amazing. He's an amazing jazz guitar player. I was very fortunate. His name is Brian Leger. Um, he, I guess he kind of picked up that I was getting a bit bored with that maybe or something. And he said, you should check out this thing called jazz. Because he thought I might dig it. So he gave me, he told me to listen to this recording of Red Garland Trio called Groovy. I think, and this recording I think was from the mid 50s. It was one of Red Garland's actually most popular albums, a great swinging album. And I listened to it, and I loved it. It was great. So I remember that was the first kind of thing he got me listening to. And then he simultaneously said, he's like, if you're going to be, if you want to actually learn to play jazz, you have to know a bit of the history. And he got me, he told me to go to the library and find a book called Bird Lives. And this was a book about Charlie Parker's life. So he said that was a great one. So I got that book and I read it and I loved it. I don't know, right from there, I was kind of obsessed with the world of jazz, really. I found it pretty difficult at first because it's really hard to just jump into jazz without knowing anything. So I really, after maybe trying for a month or two, trying to play jazz, I said, this is too hard, it's too complex, too much is going on. I didn't have a teacher. I was just kind of trying to figure it out on my own. So I went into the world of blues, and I found that was so much easier to grasp because there was less chords, there was less complications. It was just so much easier to understand. And I really kind of focused on the blues for a year or so, I didn't really get back into jazz until late high school, close to when I was auditioning for music school. And then I auditioned for school at U of T. And I was fortunate to get in, and I had a really great experience there. Yeah, I learned a lot.
So what's really cool about your story, I think, is that your teacher was like, here's a little bit of information about this music, but also get this book and read up about the history, which we're going to discuss later in the conversation.
For sure.
Yeah. But I think that's like so cool that he recommended that you do some research before playing this music.
Yeah. And I mean, it teaches you, because there's so much more to music. It teaches you about the culture and how people talked and who they were hanging out with and who was playing what and how they were treated and what clubs were like. And this book kind of focused on Bird's life, which was New York City in the 1940s and 1950s, right? So, and that's when so much of jazz was cultivated and born. So yeah, so that book, I remember, it was great, called Bird Lives.
So my next question to you is actually a pretty good follow-up to this one, is that I'm curious to know, in your opinion, obviously piano is an extremely important part of jazz, like jazz history. Jazz pianists are major contributors to the music, to the rich history. And jazz piano itself, though, comes in so many different styles. And you just named a few, right? We have blues to ragtime to stride and boogie woogie and comping and bebop and all of these things, and modern jazz piano, and so many styles, right? Such a rich history. In your opinion, should a beginner jazz pianist or jazz piano players of today learn all of these styles?
It would be difficult because there's so much to learn, right? I think it's definitely a good idea to at least learn a bit about each style. And I usually, when I talk about this, I relate it to, I have this analogy. I relate it to mathematics, where there's the beginner basic mathematics that we all learn in elementary school and high school, and before high school, but throughout elementary school, we all learn about basic arithmetic and addition and subtraction and fractions and decimals and those kind of things, which set a foundation for us in order to build more advanced concepts on top of, right? So you have to have a really strong knowledge of how basic algebra and arithmetic works in order to then understand maybe advanced calculus or proof-based math, or linear algebra, right? Or differential equations, anything like that. If your foundation isn't strong, then you're gonna have trouble later on. So it's kind of the same with jazz piano, where those styles, jazz piano has a really a history that goes really far back, starting with ragtime, Scott Joplin, turn of the century, and then into stride and boogie woogie. So I think it really is, it's really a good idea to kind of to check that out and figure out who is playing that music, and not only who, but like specific elements. Why does this sound like ragtime? versus stride. What's the difference between ragtime and stride? Because they're similar, but they're not exactly the same, right? What do you have to do as a piano player to have a basic idea of how stride works, right? And then you use that going forward, okay? Then you see the transition from stride into swing, right? Or maybe to blues, and how blues influence swing of the 1930s and 40s, and then how swing influenced bebop and bebop, hard bop, and beyond, right? So I mean, I personally love those early styles. So I maybe have dug a bit deeper into the early styles than to the very much more recent styles. But I think it's like information is helpful regardless, right? So I do think I would say it's a good idea to check out and have a basic understanding of those early styles. And if you like it, then get a deeper understanding of it, right? Like there's no reason why you can't be a killer boogie woogie piano player in 2020, you know? Like they're out there and they're killing it and it's great. I will say though about the blues is a bit different. I feel even more strongly about the blues because that is so important to jazz. They're like connected at the hips, blues and jazz. Like I haven't listened to a jazz recording. I don't know if I could name you a single jazz album that I've heard top to bottom that doesn't have some influence of the blues. And I'm talking anything.
Fair, the blues also has informed like basically the majority of popular music today.
There you go.
Exactly. From even rock and roll, especially rock and roll. You know, there's so many artists actually that specifically white rock and roll musicians that we as a Western society see as these like pinnacles of the music. But what a lot of people don't realize is that actually not only was that music fully informed by the blues, but actually there were very famous recordings from some of the most iconic white rock and roll musicians like the Beatles, Elvis Presley. That you can actually do the research and hear that they are fully taken from blues musicians, Black blues musicians of that time, like fully copy paste to the music that we hear now and think is just like so iconically creative and original, which it is. Not to not to lessen what those humongous names have done for pop culture, but I would go as far as to say that blues music has informed like all popular music that we hear today and jazz.
Absolutely. Yeah, you look at like Chuck Berry and you listen to him back to back with Elvis, and same tempo, same chord progression, same inflections, like same everything. Or like Big Joe Turner is a great example. There's recordings of him with Pete Johnson and Big Joe Turner, songs like maybe Jump, Jive, and Wail, or like Rollin' Pete, or Flip, Flop, and Fly. And then these kind of songs turned into things like Twist and Shout by the Beatles, or Hound Dog by Elvis, right? So yeah, for sure. So blues is has impacted, I 100% agree, has impacted all music that followed it, which is really heavy that's a thing. But yeah, just like J.S. Bach too, that he influenced all music that came after him.
Speaking about curiosity and kind of, music and your study, I know because, we have a lot of deep discussions about music, you and I, on a personal level and on a professional level. And something that I know about you specifically is that you are doing a very interesting study at the moment, and that over COVID isolation, you've been tackling a very interesting project. So I'm curious, in layman's terms, can you tell our audience about your practice, what you've been working on, and why?
Yeah, I mean, so I think what you're referring to is I'm right now I'm just trying to learn more songs, learn more repertoire, as we say, tunes. And I'll admit, this did start before COVID. And it started because I would always hear stories and I started hanging out with these musicians, these musicians in Toronto, you'd be playing with them and you're like, hey, do you know this tune? And they're like, yeah. Do you know this tune? Yeah. Okay. And then you try to stump them. Like you think of the most obscure song, do you know this tune? they got it. They know every song. I mean, Steve Wallace comes to mind as one of.
I knew you were thinking about Steve Wallace.
Yeah, of course. So Steve Wallace, for those who don't know, is a great Canadian, great jazz bass player who is really, really part of Canadian jazz history, you know, and he knows so many songs, and I'm sure if I asked Steve, he would say, I don't know so many songs. Don Thompson knows way more songs than me. And I've never spoken to Don, but I'm sure if you asked Don, he would probably say, oh, I don't know half as many songs as Ray Brown did. Right.
And just to interrupt briefly here, just for our audience listening, when we're referring to people knowing songs, we don't actually just mean that they've heard the song and know of the song. Mm-hmm. What Anthony's talking about is that Steve and these folks can fully play those songs by memory.
They play them by memory. They can play them in all 12 keys. They can sing you the melody. They can talk you through all the chords. Like, they really know them. So I kind of decided that if I want to call myself a jazz piano player, which I proudly do, I think it's my duty to go through these songs and to try my best to learn as many as I can, right? And to learn them the right way. Because I think early on I spent a lot of time learning songs the wrong way. There's this thing called the Real Book, and what this is it is a publishing company that published these books that kind of put sheet music to all these songs and doesn't always get them right, you know? And beyond that, even if it does get it right, it's hard to get that ingrained in some deep memory. So I kind of changed my whole approach to learning songs, and have been doing this over the pandemic. Is I actually start with the lyrics. Because as a chordal player, I find I usually, the melody would be the thing that would go first. I could still play through the chord changes, but I'm usually not playing the melody because I'm accompanying someone who's playing the melody. So melody would go. So I said, to rectify this, I am going to get out a pen and paper. I want to learn a new song. This is my process. I first look it up online, and I look it up on Wikipedia. And I just read the brief history of the song, who wrote it, what year was published. Most of these songs were published in 1931 or 1929 or around that era. And I look at the very first recording of the song, who recorded it, and then I look who made it famous, because those are often not the same. I then go to that very first recording, and these things usually would come from like Broadway musicals at the time that Cole Porter would write for, or alternatively, they would come from early, like old timey movies. So I'd go on YouTube and I'll look this up, and I'll get out my pen and paper, lined paper, so not staff paper, but just lined paper, and I'll just write out the lyrics, you know, like as if I'm writing out a poem, and I write it down top to bottom. And the fun part is I get to like watch these bizarre clips from all these old timey movies featuring like Bing Crosby and like, you know, these and the acting's different and the things they talk about is different, and it's really like you're diving into like the 1930s again. It's really crazy, or the 1950s, or whenever the movie came out, the 40s. So I write out all the lyrics, and then on the same recording, the same first recording, I'll write out the melody on top of the lyrics in the form of numbers. That's kind of a musical thing, but basic idea is I'm associating the melody with those lyrics, and then I just look up every version I can of the song, and I just go through maybe 5 or 10 versions of it, and I check how every musician sings that melody, and often they don't sing it the same as the very first recording of it, and then you kind of have to just do a discussion with yourself. Okay, am I going to go with the very first recording or what 90% of the people are playing? And eventually through that process, I found I've always managed to find the true melody, you know? So then once I have that melody, I play it in all 12 keys with the music, and then I'll take away the music, play it in all 12 keys again. And then once I feel like I've really learned the melody and I've sang through all the lyrics, then I do the same thing with the chord changes of the song. I go to the very first recording, find out all the original chord changes, and then look up all the endless possibilities of alternate changes, which as a piano player, I love like finding these alternate changes and having all these like flow charts on my paper of which chord's going where. So I grab all those changes. Hank Jones always has lots of great stuff. Bill Evans always has like the coolest alternate changes for everything. Fred Hirsch too. And then I practice that in 12 keys. Then I put both together and I practice the melody and the chord changes in 12 keys. And by then I've played the song so many times, and this is probably happens over the span of a week. I'm like, I know the song and it kind of sticks, you know, it doesn't really fade away. When I learn songs this way, they really do stick. And I will credit this, with all respect, I will credit this process to David Brade, who I love. You know, he was the guy who told me, he's like, this is the way you got to do it. If you want them to stick, you have to do it this way. And he's a great composer and piano player in Canada and Toronto. He lives in Toronto, but he's performed far beyond that. Anyway, so that's kind of what I've been doing for learning tunes. And
so what's interesting about what you're saying is that the jazz standards as we hear them today, or not even as contemporary as today, like even, you know, maybe in the past 20, 40 years or something, when you're doing a study and you're hearing somebody play the melody or singing it, and you hear that something has happened in this history where the melody all of a sudden is no longer what was originally written, and everyone is picking up this, maybe somebody who was really iconic recorded it in a certain way, and then all the rest of them are kind of paying tribute to that version, and then maybe another iconic version will come out where that's an even more different version of the second version that you hear, and then you hear people picking up on that. And now that you've listened to all of those different versions, you have the knowledge to be like, at a first listen, be like, oh, okay, well, they're not actually playing that original melody when you're hearing it this way. Oh, this is from this version when that person did it that way, and now everyone else is doing it like that. Yeah.
And you know what? Miles Davis was usually the guy who would influence everyone else with his melodies, because he would never, if you want to find the true melody of a song, don't go to Miles Davis. I hope I don't get in trouble for saying that, but and I often talk about this with you, like Billie Holiday too. Now I don't doubt these great musicians didn't know the melody. I'm sure they knew the right melody, but they sure wouldn't play it. You know, they wouldn't sing. Billie wouldn't sing the original melody, and Miles wouldn't play the original melody. But that's a different thing than actually knowing where it comes from. And any great musician you talk to, they know the true melody. And then when you know it, you have the freedom to go away from it. But you can't be faking it. You can't be not knowing it and then going away and doing your own thing and what we call faking it. I really think if you want to do the music justice, you have to do your homework. And there's a lot of homework to be done. So that's the other great thing about jazz is like, you can do this stuff until you die, and there will still be, like, you're still only at the tip of the iceberg. Right.
It's such a rich history and a rich music that one lifetime is not enough.
Yeah, I mean, I was listening to a podcast a few months ago of Chick Corea talking with Herbie Hancock, two of the greatest jazz musicians of all time. They're both in their 70s and 80s now. And Herbie, who's in his 80s, was saying in that podcast, he was saying to Chick, you know, man, like, I'm a student. I'm still a student, and I'm still learning new things. And I thought that's so nuts cool. That this kind of godlike figure like Herbie Hancock is still considers himself a student. And yeah, so that's heavy.
So Anthony, we're about to show our audience a clip of you playing. Could you just maybe explain how that relates to what we're talking about?
Yeah, for sure. So I'm in this clip, I'm going to be playing a song written by Anne Rennell. It's called Willow Weep for Me. A really cool song. This one's unique because most of those standards were written by men, but this one in particular was written by a woman. And I was just reading earlier today that Anne went to George Gershwin and visited him when she was young, when she was a student I think she went to Stanford. And she went to him with this song, and Gershwin actually encouraged her to to like go into songwriting and go into like working for Broadway. So she did just that, but definitely faced tons of challenges just because of being a woman in a male dominated discipline way back in the 1930s. So she did have a couple hits, and one of them, her probably biggest one, was Willow Weep for Me. So in this recording, what I did was I played it 2 times. The first pass, I played the original chord changes from the very original version, which was released in 1932, I think, 32 in December. And I kind of played in the same style, the old timey style they played it in. And then I did a second pass of it with all these additional reharmonizations or added chords that I've just kind of picked up from teachers or from these recordings and just mixed everything together. Yeah. So first time through, original recording, then into the reharm, the more complex version.
All right, so Anthony, I'd like to talk to you about a very specific thing, and that is about how you tend to play a lot with vocalists. And you play with a variety of singers, including myself. And although most pianists often end up playing with singers and vocalists, not all of them, study the specific art of accompanying a vocalist. Seeing as you get a lot of calls from top vocalists, you must be doing something right. And I know you're doing something right because I call you as well.
Yeah. I appreciate all those calls.
And this is something that we've spoken about a little bit together, and something that I've heard in school people explore and kind of figure out, but not everybody does this. So I'm curious to know, how do you approach playing with vocalists?
Yeah, well, first I'll say that I really generally enjoy it, so that's maybe part of the reason why I get to work with some of these singers, because I really do love playing with singers, and I love like listening to singers shows, like listening to uh to to um vocal albums. My favorite is if it's a vocalist in like a rhythm section and like maybe a horn, you know um or something like Ella and Louie, where it's the Oscar Peterson quartet with Buddy Rich and Ray Brown and Herb Ellis. Anyway, so I really like listening to it. I really love that music. So yeah, I wanted to kind of learn what's different. And there's a lot of things that are the same about accompanying vocalists versus accompanying instrumentalists, but then there's a couple like things you have to kind of be aware of. This is a unique take. Here's a unique take, and I will say it did teach me a lot. I'll credit this one to Mark Eisenman. He hit me to this, who's a great jazz piano player and a great vocal accompanist in Toronto. He's the guy. So he said, if you want to, I went to him and I was in second year and I was like, I want to learn how to play for singers. Like, you do it so well. What are the secrets? And he told me to get 2 records. First record was Sinatra and the Swinging Brass, and the second record was I think Sinatra Basie. It was so the first record was Frank Sinatra with a big band, and the second was Frank Sinatra with the Count Basie Orchestra. And he basically said, listen to these records and do what the big band does. And it's pretty heavy to think of it like that, because these big bands, these arrangements were arranged by great arrangers who put a lot of thought into it. So nothing's really improvised. It's all orchestrated. So what do I mean when I say play like the big band? Well, you'll notice if you listen to these recordings, when the song will start and the band will be wailing, it'll be a 4-bar intro. It's concise. It's really clear. That's really important, that it's really clear, and it's loud. It's in your face, and it kind of sets the tone for the song. And then as soon as Sinatra comes in, band comes way down, and Sinatra's like the star of the show. And then when Sinatra takes a break, that's when you hear a little, maybe a shot from the horn section, or a line from the sax section, or maybe a little solo from like the lead tenor or something. So we can take these kind of we can take these orchestrations and then apply them to piano. If I'm playing in a quartet, a vocal quartet, and I'm in a trio accompanying the vocalist, I've learned that it's really important to be super confident and really clear with your intro, so the vocalist knows exactly where and when to come in, and that you'd have to be crazy not to catch it. So just like in a big band recording, and then when the vocalist is singing, kind of don't overpower, and then when they take a break, that's when you can kind of put in a little fill or something. So that's a great thing, I think, for piano players to do, and it's kind of a unique take on it. Yeah, and then obviously at the same time, listen to those great vocal accompanists. Like Tommy Flanagan was known as a great vocal accompanist. I personally love George Shearing. His work behind Mel Torme is really awesome. Even Oscar Peterson, who kind of was known as a virtuosic kind of guy who danced all over the keyboards. If you hear him with vocalists, especially accompanying them like in a duo setting, like some of the verses that Ella Fitzgerald sings and OP's just setting up the verse, like you could, I think it's Tenderly is what's coming to mind. Listen to I think it's Ella. It's off the Ella and Louie album. I'm pretty sure they sing Tenderly, and Ella Fitzgerald sings the verse to Tenderly, and the accompaniment that Oscar is improvising behind her, I swear you could write that out and orchestrate it for a full orchestra, and it would sound like impeccable.
So what I want to know now is, it's kind of we're nearing our final question here.
Sure.
And I've asked everybody who is involved in this vodcast to choose 5 recordings that have deeply influenced us, myself included. And we'll be adding all of those tracks to a very special Spotify playlist where all of our audience members can access, follow, listen to, and enjoy. And I was wondering if you'd be able to introduce those recordings and tell us why you've chosen them.
First one here, the album is Monty Alexander live at the Montro Jazz Festival. I love Monty. I don't think he gets enough credit. He's so fun. So it's Monty Alexander, who's the piano player, Jeff Hamilton, great drummer, and John Clayton, the bass player. They're all 3 of them are still alive, and they're still in the midst of their careers. The song I chose was Work Song, because it's just what they do, what this trio does with like these creative arrangements and just kind of just when you think it can't get any different, it just changes on an instant. And you'll really hear this in Work Song. Specifically, listen to how Jeff Hamilton, the drummer, plays the melody in his solo. He's such a melodic drummer. And this album's crazy. I listened to the whole album because the crowd's going wild. And I actually was really, really fortunate that literally my drumming hero, who is Jeff Hamilton, he's my hero. I got to talk to him a few months ago, like in the fall. He came to Brampton, Ontario, believe it or not. And he was doing a clinic there. So I went to see him. And I asked him about this record, and he told me a really cool backstory. He was like 21 at the time. Monty was in his early 20s. So was John. And they were unknown. And this was their first major European jazz festival, the Montro Jazz Festival, which was like the biggest one in the world, right? Jeff said that the band that went on before them, I think he said it was the Thad Jones orchestra, Mel Lewis, Thad Jones Orchestra, who had a big name at the time. Then and then who was following them was the Stan Getz Quartet. Okay. And then there's these young, so in the middle of these 2 powerhouse groups, there's Monty Alexander Trio, who's pretty unknown in Europe and kind of pretty relatively unknown around the world at the time. So apparently Monty has this kind of competitive attitude, and he was like, okay, like we want to blow them out of the water with this. And you hear that like with every note on this album, it's like the crowd instantly, like the crowd just kind of instantly turned on them and just fell in love with them, and like they're going nuts and they're clapping and there's encores and like there's so much energy, and it's like really a great album to check out from top to bottom. So that's one. So I have Yesterday's Sinatra and Strings, arranged by Donnie Costa, and the arrangement in this one is like, it's beautiful. It's a beautiful orchestration for strings, and just the way Sinatra sings this ballad is just like heart-wrenching. We've got The Real Blues by the Ray Brown Trio live at the LOA. I think the album might be called Summer Wind as well. But this is Ray Brown, Jeff Hamilton again, and Gene Harris on piano. I got hip to this record by the great Phil Nimmons, who played it for us. And literally, I had never heard anything like it. I was in my 4th year. I had never heard a groove deeper than the groove on this track. Like it's mind blowing. So check that out. Wow. And then we got A Time for Love, Bill Evans. He was and Bill Evans is playing completely solo piano here, and just like a beautiful treatment of a ballad. You know, the reharms are just amazing. They're like really genius. You know what he was doing there. So that's a really beautiful one. And then bringing it back to Toronto, of course I have The Call by the David Brade Sextet off the Vivid record. And this one's just really cool because it's like so many of the local Toronto musicians who are kind of like you know, Canadian jazz royalty, really. It's the way I think of them. So we got Terry Clark on the drums, Steve Wallace on the bass, Mike Murley on sax, Gene Smith on trombone, and John McLeod on trumpet, and then David Brade on piano.
Wow.
So it's just like an all-star cast here. So that's a cool one.
That's super awesome. Well, everybody can check out the playlist after the video and go enjoy not only Anthony's clips, but also everybody else involved in today's vodcast songs that they chose, as well as my own. So, Anthony, before I let you go, tell us, where can we find, what you're up to? Is there, you got something online that our fans and our audience members and our listeners can check out to keep up with you?
Sure. Yeah. So most of my I'm on Facebook, I'm on Instagram, YouTube, and you can find me at Anthony D'Alessandro Music. Yeah, look me up there, and I'm posting regular updates about what I'm up to, what I've been practicing during quarantine, different projects that I'm working on that are going to be released to the public, just through the internet, of course, because we can't really go play live gigs. Some live streams are going to come up, and yeah, you can find out all about me there, or anthonydalessandro.ca.
Well, thank you so much, Anthony, for joining us, and can't wait to hear what you're working on and what's in the works for the future for you.
Thanks, Jenna.